Good evening and welcome. My name is April Marshall. I'm the Senior Associate Dean of Seaver College. Thank you very much for attending tonight. First, let me begin with regrets from Dean Michael Feltner, who wishes he could be with us, but he is traveling with his son this evening to a sports event. But he sends his regards and is sorry to miss the lecture this evening. This is the third lecture in the 2015-2016 W. David Baird Distinguished Lecture Series. We are honored to have Dr. Carolyn Becker joining us this evening to discuss her work and contributions to the Body Project. Before beginning the program and introducing Dr. Becker, I would like to acknowledge the Dean Emeritus of Seaver College and the individual for whom our lecture series is named, Dr. David Baird. Thank you for joining us tonight, David. Please permit me a moment to describe the format for our event. Following her introduction, Dr. Becker will speak for approximately 45 minutes. While I'm aware that some in the audience have other obligations later this evening, I request that you please wait until the conclusion of the lecture before leaving. We will provide a brief intermission to accommodate those who must depart before starting the question and answer portion with Dr. Becker. So we'll do a brief pause, we'll let people get up and move and have a little bit of commotion before we start the Q&A so that people can exit for 6 o'clock classes or whatever they may have to do. But we'll have a pause to do that. I encourage everyone who does not have a prior commitment to remain with us, for I'm confident we will have a stimulating Q&A session after the discussion this evening. I'm going to start and bring one of our professors forward to introduce Dr. Becker this evening. Introducing our speaker is Associate Professor of Psychology at Seaver College, Dr. Jennifer Harriger. Appropriate. A member of the Social Science Division. Give it up for social science if you like. Dr. Harriger recently implemented the Body Project at Pepperdine. She has published on body size stereotypes in preschool-aged children, the development of body image and eating disorders, and body size stigmatization. She shares her passion for these and related topics with our students, both in class and through undergraduate research projects. Similarly, she strives to educate the broader community as well. Dr. Harriger is also the proud mom of adorable twin girls. Give it up for that. She and her family enrich Seaver College, and Jennifer is the ideal person to introduce tonight's honored guest. Dr. Harriger.
So I cannot begin to tell you what an honor it is to introduce Dr. Carolyn Becker. Last night I had the opportunity to have dinner with her, and during our meal we were talking about researchers in the field who inspired us most. And what I did not mention to her at dinner last night is the person who inspires me the most is her. As a graduate student, I read all of her research. I attended every single conference presentation that I could. And one day, I decided this was the day I was going to introduce myself to Dr. Carolyn Becker. I waited in a long line of conference attendees, and as I got closer to the front of the line, I wondered, well, what am I going to say? And I figured it'll come to me. It's going to be so profound and so impactful that when I get to the front of the line, she is going to realize that we were meant to collaborate on all future research. This was going to be my moment. So I get to the front of the line, and there she is. And what I said to her was, I really like your research. That was it. Yeah. So it did not have the impact that I had hoped for. But luckily, I have had the opportunity to work with her in a variety of areas over the past several years. Dr. Becker is one of the most respected researchers in the field of eating disorders. She's also a gifted teacher and mentor, and she truly loves working with undergraduate students. She received her undergraduate degree at Swarthmore College and her PhD in clinical psychology at Rutgers University. She is a licensed clinical psychologist and a professor of psychology at Trinity University in San Antonio, Texas, where her research has focused on the implementation of empirically supported prevention and treatment programs in both clinical and real-world settings. She is also the president of the Academy for Eating Disorders and has won a number of awards for her research. Her research involving the Body Project, which is a cognitive dissonance-based body image acceptance program, has been published in numerous prestigious journals, and her research involving female athletes has been funded by the National Institute of Mental Health. She is the co-founder and the co-director of the Body Project Collaborative, which is a social entrepreneurship company designed to create new training opportunities for individuals interested in facilitating the Body Project. The Body Project has been delivered to over 200,000 females across the United States in both high school and university settings. It's been implemented in various countries such as Mexico, the UK, and Canada. And as Dr. Marshall mentioned, we just implemented the Body Project here at Pepperdine. So without further ado, I'm honored to introduce to you Dr. Carolyn Becker.
Thank you so much for that very kind and overly generous introduction. Before I start my talk, I would like to thank everybody who was involved in bringing me here. It's a great honor and a pleasure to be here. In particular, I would like to thank Dr. Dudley, Dr. Harriger, and as well as Kelly Okerson for facilitating everything. So the title of my talk is The Body Project, Transforming Atypical Partnerships into Global Impact. Now, before I move into the main section of my talk, I'd like to set the stage by providing an overview of today's main message. I propose that solving the big problems we face in our global community is going to require fostering atypical partnerships which can spur the innovation that we need to have global impact. Now, in case you're wondering what I mean by an atypical partnership, I'm defining that in the following way. Any partnership that involves two or more individuals or communities who have A, not collaborated previously, B, bring very different perspectives/experience to the table, and or C, combine their different strengths in a novel manner. Now, the specific story I'm going to tell today has to do with body image. As you have probably detected through careful observation, I am in fact a body image researcher. But I don't think that my broader message is actually limited to the area of body image, and I encourage all of you to consider how your own work might benefit from atypical partnerships. And I think that's really true at a school like Pepperdine, which is a very values-based organization. And so I think the message that I bring today is one that applies to many different aspects of the values that are embodied by Pepperdine. For instance, just to give you a very broad example, consider how our political landscape might be changed if people who don't currently work together actually figured out how to learn from one another and started working together. As we all know, national politics often looks like this, which typically leads to this. Instead, what I want to do today is consider what happens when we learn to work together with different people from different backgrounds and learn to set aside our differences in some ways while still respecting our differences. As Dr. Mark Dean stated, it's becoming clear that innovation flourishes best not on devices, but the social spaces between them where people and ideas meet and interact. Now, I'm taking this quote completely out of context because, of course, Dean is really talking about the idea that it's not the new technology devices that lead to innovation, but the ways in which they allow people to interact. But I still think we need to consider the magic that can occur when different communities of people come together and begin to innovate. So to close my stage setting, I want to argue that if we want to solve big problems, we need to create the conditions where people and ideas meet and interact. We celebrate pushing limits, and we ask big questions and create room for those questions to be answered. So at this point, what I'm going to do is I'm going to shift gears to provide you with a concrete example of the power of atypical partnerships. And in case you're wondering about this rather odd picture that I have up here, it sort of represents my life a little bit in the sense that I rescue Dobermans. It's one of the things I do in my spare time. And I drive a stick shift car. So once I saw this, I had to go with it. All right, so in order for our specific example to make sense, you're going to need to know a little bit something about body image. For instance, for those of you who don't spend your days studying body image and trying to convince people to change their body image, you may view body image as a relatively trivial problem of vanity. And you would not be alone, although I'm going to argue you would be wrong. More specifically, the research indicates that body dissatisfaction is a risk factor for many significant negative outcomes. For instance, depression, suicidality, even controlling for depression, weight gain, decreased exercise, smoking behaviors, and of course, eating disorders. But that just tells part of the story. So what I'd like you to do right now is to actually close your eyes. And I'd like you to think of all of the girls and women you know, and I want you to add all of them up. And now I want you to consider how much time, energy, emotion, and money they spend disliking their bodies and trying to change their bodies. I'm going to give you a little bit of time. Now add to it all the time, energy, emotion, and money that all the boys and men in your life spend disliking and or trying to change their body, and add that up and put it together with your pool for the women. And so the final thing I'd like you to ask is, what could we do in the world if we took all that time, energy, emotion, and money and applied it to more interesting problems than not conforming to some culturally based appearance ideal? You can open your eyes. So what can we do about it? Well, before 2000, actually, there wasn't much that we could do about it. Indeed, several decades of research had failed to find any intervention that could significantly impact body dissatisfaction and could produce results that, in fact, could be replicated. That all changed in around 2000, 2001, when Dr. Eric Stice published the first paper on the Body Project. The Body Project was initially designed as an eating disorder prevention program. It's based on the dual pathway model of bulimia nervosa, which was also developed by Dr. Stice. So the dual pathway model basically proposes that internalization of the thin ideal standard of female beauty leads to increased body dissatisfaction in girls and women. Increased body dissatisfaction then cascades into increased negative affect or negative emotions, as well as maladaptive dietary restraint, which are more proximal risk factors for the development of eating disorders. So the Body Project was designed to intervene with the very first step in that model, using cognitive dissonance. Now, how many of you have taken Intro to Psychology? Great. So you all know exactly what cognitive dissonance is, right? Don't worry, it's an auditorium. I'm not going to call on you. All right. So for those of you, though, who have not had Intro to Psychology, cognitive dissonance is the uncomfortable psychological state that occurs when your actions and your beliefs are misaligned. It can actually occur when two beliefs are misaligned as well, but most commonly invoked when your actions and your beliefs misalign. Much of the classic research for cognitive dissonance was actually done around racial attitudes, racial and ethnic attitudes. So for instance, if we have a person here, and this person really dislikes people from a particular racial or ethnic subgroup. And we convince this person to, we put this person in a situation where they voluntarily act nice to a person of that racial or ethnic subgroup. They are now acting in a way that is contrary to their stereotyped beliefs. What the research suggests is the most common outcome is they will bring their beliefs in line with their actions. So in the case of the Body Project, what we do is we put participants in a scenario where they voluntarily speak and act against the thin ideal standard of female beauty, with the idea that that's going to create a cascade of improved body satisfaction, decreased negative affect, decreased maladaptive dietary restraint, and ultimately decreased eating disorders. The Body Project is a small group intervention for adolescent girls and young women, and it's typically administered in 4 hours in either 2, 4, or 6 sessions. In terms of the empirical support, an ongoing meta-analysis that Dr. Stice and his colleagues are conducting, they've identified 43 published and unpublished trials studying the Body Project, conducted by approximately 20 different laboratories around the world, which is hugely important because that means that it's not only Dr. Stice that gets positive results with it, but many different labs that get positive results. And indeed, that body of research, which by the way is the most empirical support for any body image program ever developed, has shown consistent reductions in thin ideal internalization, body dissatisfaction, dietary restraint, negative affect, and eating disorder pathology as compared to both assessment-only and active intervention control groups. The Body Project in one study has also been found to reduce onset of eating disorders by 60% versus assessment-only control. So more specifically, what they found was that participants who went through the Body Project had a 6% onset of eating disorder, 6% of them had an onset of eating disorder case at 3-year follow-up compared to 15% in the assessment-only control group. And I should note that most studies aren't actually even designed to test that outcome. That's a very expensive study to run. So that's one of the reasons I think we haven't seen that more often. The Body Project was the first psychological prevention program ever to be published under Oxford University Press's Treatments That Work series. That's a very prestigious series with a very high editorial bar. There's also significant research for the intervention theory. So for instance, 2 studies have found that thin ideal internalization change is what mediates symptom reduction. Another research group also found that participants who went through the Body Project had decreased negative effect when they viewed thin models in terms of their body dissatisfaction. And fMRI research conducted by Eric Stice and his colleagues found that those participants who went through the Body Project had increased pre-post reduction in the reward region neural responsivity, which is the caudate, to thin models, and they had decreased attentional response in the anterior cingulate to thin ideal statements as compared to controls. What that means, for those of you for whom like, what the heck did that mean? What that basically means is that participants who go through the Body Project allocate less attention to thin ideal images and statements, and they find them less rewarding. So for those of you who have not been trained in the Body Project and are not familiar with it, I thought it would be helpful to go through a few of the components so you understand what the intervention does. So the first thing we do is we have participants identify and describe the thin ideal, and we label it as a construct. We then have some motivational enhancement questions so that participants are able to identify the negative effects of the thin ideal, not only on themselves but others. We then have them create lists of the costs of pursuing the thin ideal. Most people in our culture are acutely aware of the benefits of conforming to appearance standards. If you can achieve the standard, you know the good things that will supposedly happen to you. What most people don't do is think about the negative effects of pursuing those standards. There's a verbal challenge task in which they identify times in the past when they felt pressure to pursue this ideal, and they come up with assertive statements. If they could go back in time, what would they now say? We have role plays countering fat talk. For those of you who are not familiar with the phrase fat talk refers to any speech that implicitly or explicitly reinforces the thin ideal standard of female beauty. Does this make my butt look big? Do I look fat in this? Wow, you look great. Have you lost weight? All of those are examples of fat talk, and they practice responding to that. We have a behavioral challenge where participants identify something that they would like to do but do not do because of body image concerns, and we have them go do it. There's a mirror exposure, and I encourage all of you to do this, by the way. Stand in front of a mirror and write down only positive things about yourself. It's not the way most people use that tool. And by positive things, I mean emotional things, for you all, spiritual things, as well as physical, both appearance and functional. We have additional role plays. We also ask participants to partake in body activism, spread the message wider, and we have problem-solving future pressures to be thin. Okay, so that's your thumbnail sketch background on the Body Project. So now, as some of you may be aware, developing an intervention to solve a particular problem is actually just the very first step in remedying that problem on a large scale. So one problem for psychological interventions is the so-called research practice gap. More specifically, it's been well established that most psychological interventions with really solid scientific support are not routinely used in clinical practice or service settings. And as you're going to see, this could have been the fate of the Body Project, but instead something else entirely happened. So now I'm going to move on to the story of the Body Project and atypical partnerships, or as I like to say, how we avoided falling into the research practice gap. All right. So the first partnership that we developed in the Body Project was with the local sororities of Trinity University. This starts when I am back around 2000 and wanting to do some research in this area, and I'm working with an undergraduate student on her thesis, and we decide that we want to see if we can replicate Dr. Stice's early findings. But we needed participants for our study. We needed participants to come and be involved with it. And at this point, there's no buzz around the Body Project. And it turned out this student happened to be a sorority member. And she suggested that we could get the sororities to give some service credit to their members for participating in her study. And I said, that's great. How do we go about doing this? Because at this point, by the way, I am the most sorority naive person you've ever met. So I went to a school that not only didn't have sororities, they were actively kicked off campus many years ago. Molly Yard, who later went on to be the president of the National Organization of Women, actually led the charge, and over 90% of the student body voted them off campus. So this is about as non-sorority a campus as you can get. And I know nothing about sororities. But I began my anthropological experience into the Greek system. So what we basically did was we ran a very small study, 25 participants, half went through the body project, half went through an alternate intervention, and much to our surprise, we actually got positive results. We were stunned. We really didn't think it was going to work. Nothing at that time replicated. It sort of seemed like a fluke that Dr. Stice had gotten positive results. So at the end of that, I went back to the sororities and I said, so what do you think? Much to my surprise, they said, make it bigger. We think more of our members need to go through this program. So we said, okay. So my undergraduate students and I buckled down and we designed a new study, a much larger study, and we, much to our surprise, once again got really positive results with the body project. And this, in fact, was the first independent published replication of Dr. Stice's work that I published with my undergraduate students. So I went back to the students again and said, so what do you think? This was one of the phrases that gets me in trouble. So what do you think? So they say to me, well, now we want to take all of our new members through the program like on a required basis. And we want to continue to mix all our new members because when I started working with the sororities, one of the things that we did was instead of doing what most researchers do, which is come to the sororities or a Greek organization and scold them and say, you bad organization, you have a problem and you need to let me fix it, we said to them, you represent the largest body of organized women on campus. You have the power to create change. So we had this really pretty positive relationship with them, and they said we want all of our new members to come through because we now think of ourselves as the sororities of Trinity University, and we like working with each other as opposed to just being in our individual organizations. So this created a problem because up until now I had run all the groups with undergraduates co-leading the groups with me. But if we were going to take all the new members of the Trinity sororities through the program, my students were telling me we were going to have to do it at once, which meant we were going to have to run 12 simultaneous groups. Now my students will tell you that I am one of the most high energy faculty you will meet, but even I cannot be in 12 rooms at once. So we had, in essence, what's known as a scalability problem. For those of you who are not familiar with that term, scalability refers to the degree to which something can be scaled up to reach a large number of people without sacrificing effectiveness. So I looked around, and because I'm at a school that doesn't have graduate students in psychology, much like the situation you have here, I looked at one of my students and I said, well, you've been running this group with me, you could run these groups, and if you could run it, theoretically other undergraduates can run it. In fact, what we were proposing, although the language was not really out there at the time, we were proposing task-shifting delivery of the intervention from me, an expensive and limiting provider, to lay providers, which actually increases your scalability. Never thought it would work. And if you ever come and watch us do it, it's the most insane thing that you've ever seen. So we get 140 students, and they're being allocated to different rooms, and we're collecting data. I mean, it's really nuts. And certainly when I proposed it, and I said, look, I think this is how we're going to make it work, my students looked at me and they went, you're crazy, Dr. Becker. I said, yeah, but wouldn't it be cool if it worked? What's the worst can happen? We can fail. Let's try it. Much to our surprise, it worked. We were stunned. We got positive effects. The sororities loved it. The task shifting worked. So over the next few years, we conducted a couple more studies, once again demonstrating that we could replicate the task-shifting approach. And my sororities have run this program every year since then. So we run annually with all of their new members. This year, for the very first time, we also ran with our fraternities. And I can talk to people more about that later during the Q&A. But to give you an idea of the contributions that these undergraduate students have made, by May 16, we conservatively estimate that the Trinity sorority and more recently fraternity members will have contributed approximately 30,000 hours to the body project as participants, peer leaders, research assistants, and program organizers. Which means that I really need to also mention what I think of as sort of a little bit of a hidden partnership. It's somewhat less atypical in that faculty and undergraduate students work all the time together, but I'm going to argue that in this case, it was the depth of the partnership that was somewhat atypical. As I mentioned before, Trinity University, largely a liberal arts college. I have no graduate students, and while I am not looking to put down graduate students, they are wonderful and creative, at times, I'm going to argue that they overshadow or prevent undergraduate students from taking the level of responsibility that they're capable of managing. For instance, I do think it is atypical for a researcher like me to run 5 randomized controlled trials, including over 500 participants, with no funding and only undergraduate research assistants. Indeed, I'm frequently asked, who pays for the body project sorority studies? And my response is the bank of sweat and blood. And that bank comes from my undergraduate students. They are the engine that has driven this forward, and there is no way any of this would have happened without their massive contribution. So I think that there is a lesson here, which is that many faculty underestimate what it is their undergraduate students can accomplish with sufficient support. And you're going to see their role is even bigger than you think it is. All right, so if you had spoken to me when I was in the middle of doing all that research that was going on in those previous slides, I would have told you I was thrilled. This thing was bigger than I ever dreamed. Look, I never thought that first 25-person study was going to work. So now we're running annually, we're running sustainably, we've learned to task shift. I mean, this was really pretty cool. And in fact, we were developing quite a reputation for having pulled this off because no one anywhere in the world had pulled this off within the eating disorders field. But then we got bigger, and we picked up even new momentum when a new partner arrived on the scene. And that was the Tri Delta National Sorority. So in 2005, Tri Delta called me and said, we've learned about your work through our alumni network, and we're interested in talking to you. From 2005 to 2007, we pilot tested with 7 chapters. This was a brainstorming, relationship-building time with the executive office. So remember, I've already gone through anthropological experience number 1, learning how to navigate local sororities. Well, moving into the nationals was like a whole different thing. So, I mean, it was a whole new learning experience that actually took a couple of years. In 2007, Tri Delta took the unprecedented step of deciding to proceed with the program and agreed to purchase tailored materials from Oxford University Press. So at the time, we had what we called the manual problem, which is that the manual had been published with Oxford University Press, which was great because that was very prestigious, but it wasn't the right kind of manual for doing the task-shifted version of the program. It was the right manual for clinician delivery. And so we needed different materials. And at the time, because copyright was tied up with Oxford University Press, we needed those published. So it was actually a huge deal because Tri Delta underwrote the program for everyone. And the price tag was quite significant because Oxford was not willing to publish it unless it was a big enough order to make it worth their while. In 2008, we rebranded the Body Project as the Reflections Body Image Program. So if you've ever seen this name, the Reflections Body Image Program, it's the Body Project. We just rebranded it for the purpose of this rollout. And we also launched the Reflections Body Image Academy, as well as Fat Talk Free Week, which was an international advocacy week aimed at providing advertising for the Body Project, but also sort of took off on an unprecedented scale. Our goal was to reach 20,000 women in 5 years with an evidence-based body image intervention, something at that time nobody was thinking of doing. I mean, this was just big on a whole different scale, which meant that we once again ran into the scalability problem. Because although I could train undergraduates to run the program, because I have a day job, which is called teach classes, do my job, like my service and all of that at Trinity, I could not be on the road all the time training undergraduate peer leaders. So I was once again a limiting factor. So what we created was a train the trainers model, that we would train trainers who could then train undergraduates to implement the program. The program at this time was endorsed by the Academy of Eating Disorders for excellence, research practice integration, and community collaboration, something the AED had never done before. And we launched back at Trinity, so once again my undergraduates stepped up, what we jokingly called the me versus them study. So we needed to find out in a more controlled way whether this train the trainers approach would actually work. So I decided to see if I could train undergraduates to train other undergraduates to implement the Body Project, and if they could get as good outcomes as we got if I trained the undergraduates. So basically the other name for the study was the Does My PhD Matter? Turned out it does not. We published that study in 2014. My undergraduates did a lovely job. I was very proud of them. And once again discovered I'm horribly overeducated. So by 2009, the number of universities impacted by the Reflections program, or the Body Project, it was 28. And by 2012, over 15,000 workbooks had been sold or granted. We also needed new manuals to be published, and the number of universities impacted by the program was 90. So we come to the end of 2012, and unfortunately, in many cases, some good things must come to an end. Tri-Delta had a change in leadership, and they decided to narrow their vision back to just focusing on their members. And that was not what I was interested in doing. So we amicably separated. I called it an amicable divorce. And Dr. Stice and I decided to create the Body Project Collaborative. Now, Dr. Harriger mentioned that the Body Project Collaborative is a social entrepreneurship company. And if you don't know what that means, I didn't know what that meant actually. I formed this company not knowing what that meant. If you'd asked me in 2012, I said, well, we're forming this company, and technically it's a for-profit company, but we never intend to make any profits, so it's going to be a not very profitable for-profit company. Because the primary goal of the Body Project Collaborative was to do social good, was to make the Body Project available, because when we separated from Tri-Delta, we lost our infrastructure. Fortunately, we did retain all of our trainers for the Body Image Academy. So basically, the Body Project Collaborative operates like a nonprofit, but we don't have nonprofit status. So the main purpose of it is to create sustainable infrastructure for the Body Project to do social good. All right, we also had, though, in addition to our trainers and our new little tiny company, we had scalability solutions. So we had our blended task shifter train the trainers model, which we had tested in very controlled conditions at Trinity and rolled out on a national scale with Tri-Delta. We subsequently added to this by learning how to train master trainers. So just so you're following me on language, a peer leader or facilitator is someone who runs the Body Project. A trainer is someone who trains facilitators, typically undergraduates. A master trainer trains trainers to train facilitators. And these days, we actually have global expansion trainers who train master trainers. To give you an idea of the length of training, 2-day training, we can train approximately 12 to 16 facilitators and 4 to 7 trainers. In 4 to 6 days, we can train about 2 master trainers. And you do all of this simultaneously. All right, so what happens next? Well, much to our surprise, things then jumped to a whole new level. So we thought we had gotten as big as we were going to get. In fact, we worried when Tri-Delta left that things were going to fall apart, but nope, we just jumped. In 2013, Dove, you may be familiar with the Dove videos, that comes from the Dove Self-Esteem Project, and the World Association of Girl Guides and Girl Scouts decided to partner in creating an adapted version of the Body Project called Free Being Me. Now, Dove had previously had self-esteem workshops out there, but I was one of them. Many people critiqued them as not being evidence-based. They were not based on an intervention that had strong scientific support. And thanks to the work of Philippa Diedrich, Dove decided to take a new approach and go with something that had strong scientific support. This discussion was initiated in 2011, but we really weren't sure anything was going to happen. But in 2013, they launched, relying heavily on the scalability models developed in our previous partnerships. This does not happen without my undergraduates at Trinity. This does not happen without me running into the scalability problem, first with my undergraduates and Tri-Delta. Everything we're achieving now is based on those earlier partnerships. And again, I want to emphasize undergraduate students. By 2015, the Free Being Me program had been translated into 17 languages and implemented in 120 countries. And they have reached 2.3 million girls directly and indirectly. And preliminary data coming out of 4 countries being collected by Philippa Diedrich and Eric Stice, I just saw the data. It's looking very pretty and very nice, suggesting real impact. When Dove and WAGS launched, we launched actually with a large-scale global training at their World Center in Hampstead Heath. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that later. So that was conducted in November of 2013. I was lucky enough to go out for that. More recently, they held a Free Being Me festival at their World Center in Sangam, India, and pulled people, their members from around the world to participate in the intervention. And they've done a really lovely job of explaining why they're doing this. And so I want to show you, just because I think you really get a different feel for this program when you see this very short, it's just a 1-minute video that we're going to show. We hope.
We're all born with dreams. To be a dancer, to be a doctor, to be an
And so I think this is a really great example of what happens when constituencies that are not used to working together. Dove was not used to working together with really, really serious scientists. WAGS was not used to a structured protocol. We were not used to working with either of those organizations. This doesn't happen without new types of partnerships. And what we've seen is with every new partnership that we form, more people come to the table, bringing new pieces to our puzzle to help us solve the problem and stay out of the research practice gap. So I have just a few more partnerships to share with you. In 2013, we formed a pilot partnership with the Eating Recovery Center Foundation. The Eating Recovery Center is the largest of the residential eating disorder treatment centers. The foundation is their nonprofit branch. We just, in 2015, signed a 5-year deal to bring the Body Project to 85 new universities that were unable to allocate the resources or would not. Basically, there were people on their campus that wanted to bring it, but they couldn't find a grant like Dr. Harriger was able to find here at Pepperdine. And so we're going to be able to expand the Body Project to 85 new campuses throughout the United States and Canada on the basis of this partner. In 2014, after 2 years of planning and grant writing, we partnered with the National Eating Disorders Association to bring the Body Project to underserved high school girls in New York City. Now, this program, we really focused first on building their infrastructure. And so they've only reached 50 girls so far, and they've also really wanted to get their school buy-in. But they've got 2 master trainers, 9 trainers, and 35 facilitators. So they're really looking to expand their rollout in the coming year. What was really neat, too, though, is because we gave them master trainers, and this is one of the reasons we'll never be a profitable company, because we come in, we train you, and we leave, and then you don't need us ever again. So if you want to make a company that's going to make money, you need to be being brought back, and the main purpose is to create sustainable solutions so that people don't need to keep paying us. They are now offering clinician training in the Body Project prior to their regular conference. And what was really exciting, Nita informed me, was that pre-training sold out so fast they had to add a second training to it, which was really exciting. And they are currently possibly brokering with a new corporate partner. And so for the first time, the Body Project may be delivered in a corporate setting. In 2015, we partnered with Comenzar de Nuevo, which is a residential eating disorders treatment center down in Monterrey, Mexico. Eva Trujillo and Marisa Fernandez Garcia really spearheaded this. They invested in 5 days of training and got 2 semi-retired businessmen out of Monterrey to develop comprehensive business and marketing plans for large-scale Latin American expansion. And once again, they are focusing on sustainable solutions, not really profitable ones. But honestly, if you're going to ask people to spend large portions of their time training, you do have to pay them. So that's what I mean. That's why we need to sort of have good business plans. We left them. Dr. Marisol Perez went down with me because I am not fully bilingual, with 3 master trainers, 7 regular trainers, and 20-plus facilitators. They actually convinced the Mexican government for rollout to 10,000 schools in Mexico. Unfortunately, the government then turned over, so they're renegotiating that. But they are in the process of launching a big marketing campaign throughout all of Latin America. So I'm going to shift gears now for the final portion of my talk, one last time, and answer the question that I am commonly asked, which is, what is the secret in forming all of these partnerships? I'm going to say it's not such a secret because I talk about this stuff all the time. Number one, even before I knew what community participatory research methods were, and in fact, the citation I have here is from 2005, and I was doing this back in 2000, we have relied heavily on what I later learned were, in fact, community participatory research methods. This approach to doing research is very common in public health, nursing, social work. It is much less common in psychology. And so Israel and colleagues outlined 9 key components to it, but I'm just going to you can see them while they're up there, really summarize it. It's about forming really collaborative, respectful partnerships in which there is a tremendous amount of equal power and shared decision making. It's about respecting decisions, respecting differences, but negotiating ways to find compromise so that you can achieve a common goal. It means making a long-term commitment to the community, the project, and future sustainability. It's very different than traditional research where we go off and get a grant, come in, have participants, and then we vanish. In this case, you're making a much longer-term commitment, even if you're not going to get another grant. In addition, I'm going to argue that you need to be willing to get out of your comfort zone. You need to be willing to talk to people that are very different than you, and you cannot be afraid to fail. All right, so here's the personal side of it. Here is me outside my comfort zone in all of this. This gets kind of funny. Number one, engaging with the media. I hated talking to reporters. But after Tridelta invested 6 figures into what we were doing, I was like, if they need me to talk to the media, I guess I better talk to the media. Conveniently, they did put me through media training. But I mean, I've had to be on TV, talk to reporters of all sorts. I remember being on the radio at one point, and I'm talking to this reporter, and they're asking me this question. I'm going, you're not going to give me time to triangulate back on message. So I said, that's a really interesting question, but what is more interesting is, boom, and off I went. I was like, who is that person speaking? I don't know how to do that. People got really excited in San Antonio and decided to hold a flash dance mob in front of the Alamo that was videotaped and put up on YouTube. Okay, I'm not a dancer. I don't do flash dance mobs, but I did this time. Starting a company completely outside my comfort zone. Becoming a sorority member at age 40. Having 600 people initiate me, and me alone. That is almost 6 times more people than were at my wedding. That was a very interesting experience at age 40. Foundation training at the World Association of Girl Guides and Girl Scouts. So that wonderful meeting in 2013 where we did our first world training. I'm going to summarize as 56 hours of jet lag, shared bathrooms, and British cafeteria food, which if you never had, consider yourself lucky. Energizers. So one of the things that happens in WAGs is that they are used to spending a lot of time with very young girls. And so they do these things called energizers, which are sort of these little activities, which include flapping a parachute up and down. And then somebody yells, where's glasses? And now it's 7:15 in the morning before I've had my tea. I am running around in a circle so that I can go flap the parachute again. This is really not my thing. This, I'm high energy, but that's not the kind of energy I'm usually. The other one I will tell you about came from Australia, and I'm native-born Australian, so I sort of think it's interesting that I have to share this one. It involved people in rows of 3, and then somebody's name was yelled out, and you ran around in the circle, and then you formed bridges, and then everybody had to dive into the circle for a scarf. I'll just summarize it as we were told to be careful diving for the scarf. We don't want any concussions. All right, so what's the worst that can happen? Well, the worst that can happen is that you fail. And to some degree with Tridelta, we did fail. We didn't succeed at doing what we said we were going to do. We had talks of much bigger ambitions. But you pick yourself up and you start again, and 3 years after we ended the relationship with Tridelta, we had significantly more impact than we had before. And I'm going to suggest that the lessons learned from failing are as valuable as those learned from success. So it's really important that you not be afraid to fail, that you really are willing to sort of put yourself out there. Now, one of the greatest lessons that I did learn from Tridelta, though, was to dream big. It was actually the woman who was the visionary in sort of shaping what we tried to do, and then unfortunately she left Tridelta and we had the change of leadership, said to me at one point, and she said, well, let's try to change the world. And I thought, change the world? I'm just trying to reach a few people with a body image intervention. Since when am I trying to change the world? But I think now that is, in fact, what we're trying to do. We are trying to change the world. We are trying to create a place where little girls, and hopefully someday little boys, don't grow up with the same pressures that you all faced growing up. And where we can really have a world where people can spend all that time, energy, emotion, and money doing far more productive things to make this a better place to live in than worrying and trying to change their appearance. The other component that I want to share, and this comes actually from one of my sort of people who inspire me, Ruth Striegel-Weissman, a number of years ago gave a talk at the Eating Disorder Research Society meeting and said that if we wanted to change the landscape of eating disorders, her final message was that we needed to learn how to play nice with one another. And we've really taken that to heart with the Body Project. We share materials and ideas, and we really try to give away at least some of our time. Fortunately, we sold enough manuals with Tridelta and actually with our endeavor in the UK, Succeed Foundation, that they decided to publish another version of the regular manual. And in doing so, gave Eric Stice the opportunity to regain some royalty rights in that he now can put all the novel scripts up online and we can just give them away, which markedly reduces the cost. So we basically said, forget the royalties on the volume we were getting before. Let us just give away all the derivative strips, which means we can now have a Spanish version up there and a French version and a 2-session and a 4-session and a 6-session and one for peer leaders and one for clinicians. And all of these derivative scripts are just up there for people to download, use for free, and make copies, which makes the program much cheaper to run. I think important in playing nice also means letting other people take real ownership of the project, and for us also publications. So Dove and WAGs never happens without giving Dr. Philippa Dietrich the freedom to run with that partnership. And I think the same is going to be true with Comenzar de Nuevo down in Latin America. That we really take on people, we train them, and then we say, we trust you to do this and to come back to us if you have questions. And we're going to play nice, and we're going to let you take some ownership and get some real credit for what you're accomplishing. As part of that, I need to really express the degree to which this is not my work. This is the work of hundreds and thousands of different people. And so we like to say informally in the Body Project community that it takes a global village to make this happen, that we are a global community working towards a common goal. These are many of the researchers who have been involved in advancing the Body Project. You will see Dr. Harriger's name is down on the bottom if I step out of the way. And if we missed any, we apologize. It's kind of actually hard to keep up on this list. But the researchers are just the beginning. These are all of the other contributors that have made what's happened happen. And they range from the undergraduate research assistants who have given thousands and thousands of hours, all the different organizations, the different people who have funded us, the different people who have supported us, as well as really creative individuals who have allowed this thing to move forward. They say a picture's worth 1,000 words, so I like showing these pictures from various components of the Body Project being used in both the United States and around the world. And because Pepperdine is one of the newest members to our Body Project community, I thought I would put this up so you all can see how you can become involved with Dr. Harriger.
You mentioned in your presentation that you guys wound up doing it with fraternities this year, as well as sororities, and I was just really interested in hearing what that looked like and how the program was tailored to work with boys versus girls.
Right. So we started working with male students a couple of years ago. We've run one preliminary trial, and the results were a little bit equivocal for the females in that trial. So we're doing another study before we sort of tell the world more broadly. So this year we are running both mixed gendered, all male and all female groups. The big thing that you do, so for the mixed gender groups, what we do is we have to define the male appearance ideal and the female appearance ideal. And then all of our language in terms of like fat talk, we've had male students go through and come up with it tends to be a lot of locker room fat talk for them. Go through that, and so we have different gendered examples. We have doubled the number of role plays so that people can move back and forth with the gender as appropriate. A lot of the general questions didn't have to be changed. So that was the big change there. Then the male version just actually required us to then eliminate out the female portion and then just increase the number of role plays and increase more of the language. We just ran Tuesday night. So we ran Tuesday night. It was even more crazy than usual because we had, I think, 140 to 150 participants, and we had 65 peer leaders trained and everything else. But I had to go home once it was all running smoothly and pack because I was flying here. So I haven't heard how the male-only groups went. What I can say from having trained mixed gender peer leaders and everything else, and I've also trained all male peer leaders, interestingly enough, if you had told me that the addition of testosterone was going to chill things out, I would have told you you're crazy. That's not usually the way that I think of the addition of guys, particularly college guys, to something. But when the women run by themselves, you get this kind of political anger, there's a real sort of frustration with the pressures to conform to the appearance ideal. You get a lot of frustration around the sexual objectification of women. That part does not emerge in the mixed gender groups. And the mixed gender groups have this sort of kumbaya, we're all in it together feel, which have a very different feel. Now the big concern about the mixed gender groups is that as researchers, we're a little worried that political anger actually may be a fundamental component of the effectiveness of the Body Project, and that removing it may mean that the program is less effective for females. So that's one of the concerns there. In terms of the all-male groups, we're actually the third research group to do that. So Tiffany Brown ran groups at Florida State with gay males. And then Glenn Jankowski ran them in the UK with a more heterosexual population. His results at 3 months were not as hopeful as we would hope for, or not as positive as we would hope for. So we're waiting to see what happens when we run with all males in our situation. Our mixed gender data looked great for the guys. It did not look as good for the women. So we're still sort of figuring this all out research-wise. I would really like to be able to run mixed gender groups. The question is, can we run them without taking the effectiveness away for the females, or are we going to have to separate the genders and run them, which means we still have to figure out how to make the groups for all male as effective as possible.
Can you talk about the span of ages that you're working with, especially now that you're dealing with WAGs and Dove and all of that? And also, if there's any differences in terms of the needs that you find as a result of the age differences?
Right. So I predominantly work at the collegiate level, though we do have a project in the San Antonio high schools right now. So towards the end of 2014, I had a student who was a December graduating, and she's in my lab, and she wanted to go on to get a PhD in clinical psychology, but was going to do some full-time research first. And I asked her, what do you want to do when you graduate? And she said to me, well, what I really want to do is I want to run the body project in San Antonio high schools. I said, that's great, but I have no money to pay you. And this was the part that was really stunning to me. She says, what if I go raise my own salary? Which she then proceeded to do. She actually got money out of an area foundation in San Antonio that's never given to Trinity. They're big Texas A&M fans, so they don't care about Trinity. But they care about the city of San Antonio, and so they were willing to funnel money through Trinity that was going to benefit San Antonio. Eric Stice's research is focused on both college and high school age. When we went into WAGs, we had to go down to lower ages. So in the end, what we created, and that was quite the process, because their approach to doing stuff is what they call non-formal education, and it's very, very unstructured. And we already knew that an unstructured body project didn't work. So we had to really struggle this is where you have to really learn to work with people, to come up with something that they felt fit their approach, but that we felt was true enough to the body project in order to actually have a chance of being effective. So with them, we created 2 different programs. There's, I believe it's an 11 to 14 and then a 7 to 11 age one. Our general guess is that the 7 to 11 is going to be the least effective, and it's going to be the 11 to 14. I think the data I just saw that were actually really pretty data was the 11 to 14. So I'm not sure what the data for the 7 to 11 is looking, or 7 to 10 and then 11 to 14. So we had to go down ages. And then I'm hoping this summer, it's actually, we've been pilot testing for a number of years, but I've just been too busy with other things to actually go up in ages. So I have a program that I designed, we call it the Women's Body Initiative, that is really the body project for older women. And we've run those groups with a wide variety of ages. One of them had somebody who was 25 and all the way up to 65. And we ran with that full spectrum of adult women. And that's really what I want to be doing next, is working with that age group. And that has a very different feel to it. So we've really had to tweak it. Older women go through the program much more slowly. I think whether it's their depth of years or their amount of experience, there's sort of a level of sort of wanting to really chew over the ideas, and so they don't sort of race through the questions as quickly. And then, of course, with older women, you have to deal with the aging piece of it. And what we've discovered is that even for a lot of women who've sort of managed to sort out their size and shape concerns, they got no handle on the age concerns. And we worked actually with some clinicians with the local eating disorders clinic, and they were great when we had them challenging fat talk. We threw out the first old talk statement, and it was just like, what do we say to that? So I think that's what I'm really looking forward to doing next. So I think we're going to have to hit it at multiple ages to really do something. Like if we really do want to change the world, which I very well may fail at. Like I totally get that, but I'm okay with that. So yeah, I think we're going to have to go older as well.
Thanks. Hi, you mentioned the difference there's the presence of political anger among young women's groups, and it's not as present when they're mixed with men. Right. I'm wondering, is there a difference in behavior among men when they're in groups together versus in the mixed gender groups? And then also, what are the benefits to the mixed gender groups?
So I've not actually listened to any audio tapes from the pure male groups because we just started running those on Tuesday. What I can say is from the training, the guys don't have as much anger. And I think part of that is that although the male body is being objectified more these days, they still got a long way to go compared to the level of objectification of women. And I think that's probably driving some of that. So they tend to be more like, yeah, like this is a problem for me, and yeah, I want it like to get better, as opposed to, this is a huge problem, and I'm really getting angry about it, and I really want to do something. So I think that may be interesting. If we don't get as good effects in the male-only groups, that may be an interesting component of it. But we're still sort of figuring that out, and we're sort of in the hypothesis component. I forgot the other part to your question. Oh, the benefits to having, I think there's some real benefits to having mixed gender groups if we can make them happen. I think what you do see, which I really like, is you see a greater appreciation for the effects of everybody's behavior on each other. So we get a lot of the guys saying things like, really? You listen to us when we say that stuff? Like, we don't really mean anything by that. And the women are sort of saying, wow, I didn't realize that, they were worried about these things. And so I think the other thing we're hoping is that actually you get maybe possibly better relations between men and women by going through that and gaining greater empathy for what each side sort of deals with. So I think if we can get them to work, I'd be really excited to see that. I'm a data person, and I need the data.
So we recently hosted Fat Talk Free Week at our campus this past week. And one question I had is, how do you address people that kind of challenge the message and disagree with the purpose of the Body Project?
Right. Okay, so what types of problems were they giving you? I can guess, but it's better if I know.
A lot of people had issues with the phrase fat talk. They thought that was kind of degrading fat people, which, obviously it's doing the opposite. But, and some people also had problems. They think, oh, well, we shouldn't love ourselves if we need to change to conform to the thin ideal.
Okay, so the first one is the one that I've had to have a lot of practice on this, because when I first had to talk to the media, the media is not anywhere near as nice as the way you just phrased it. They basically will say to you, so, and you're in the middle of this radio interview, and they're going, so, but don't you think we need to be saying these things to fat people because they're overweight and that's not healthy, and so they need to change and they need to be miserable in order to be motivated to change. So here's my two-part answer to that one. Number one, which is sort of the more let's get it on an intuitive level. I want you to imagine, let's go with let's just say you all have cars, okay? I want you to think about right now, how do you treat a car that you hate? What do you do to it? Do you wash it? No? Do you get regular oil changes? Do you, care whether the dog with the muddy feet jumps in the back? Do you, you don't clean the interior. If somebody hits it, do you get it fixed? No. Right. Now, a car that you love, how do you treat that? Really differently, right? Well, it turns out that that's a fundamental piece of being human. We could pick anything right now. A pair of shoes, a pair of jeans, a dog, a child. Human beings don't treat things well that they deeply, deeply hate. We just don't do it. We treat things that we like a whole lot better. So that's the intuitive piece. Now, what's interesting is the research actually bears that out. In fact, research basically shows, for instance, because most people are concerned when they're talking about this, that, well, people are going to gain more weight if they like their bodies. In fact, I actually had a Tri-Delta member, it was an alumni, who said to me, she goes, if we have the Body Project, back then it was Reflections, all of our members are going to get fat. She literally says this in the middle of the meeting. Well, research by Dr. Diane Newmark-Steiner with overweight adolescent girls has definitively found that overweight adolescent girls who like their bodies gain less weight over time than overweight girls who don't like their bodies. There is no evidence that hating your body makes you treat it better in terms of sort of long-term care of your body. And there is no evidence that feeling better about your body makes you treat it worse. So that's my short answer. The answer that I would say to the people about fat talk is really, yeah, you could argue that the language would be better, if it was body talk. You could say, we might want to broaden it. We didn't coin the term. Mimi Nichter did it. She was an anthropologist who coined the term. It's actually a pretty complicated question, though, because there are fat activists out there who would say we would prefer that people just start using the word fat, and that we just call it what it is. And in which case, most of the speech is basically saying fat is bad. So it is fat talk. It is talk, which is why we use the phrase old talk when we conducted our first study, demonstrating that people talk about age in a similar way. There is some speech these days, of course, that there are women who are very, very thin who get critiqued for not having, a larger chest or certain curves or things like that. And I think that would be the better argument for going to a phrase like body talk. But for better or worse, fat talk is the phrase out there in the system. So, yeah, I could argue for changing it. And at times we do. So, I would sort of just have the discussion with them. The other piece, just to add to it, and we just had another new study come out. There are about 1/3 of people who technically meet criteria for obesity are actually perfectly healthy from a metabolic syndrome perspective. About half of overweight people are perfectly healthy from a metabolic syndrome perspective. And about 1/3 of people who are normal or underweight are not healthy from a metabolic syndrome. So I also like to remind people that BMI is a very rough correlation with health. There is a correlation there, but it's not a great one. And you cannot look at somebody and know whether or not they are healthy for the most part. Now, on the absolute extremes, yes. For the person that cannot get out of bed because they're 500 pounds and can't breathe, yes. And the person who is so emaciated that they're at risk of dying from starvation any day tomorrow, so yes, on the absolute extremes. But in most of that middle segment, you can't look at somebody and know.
In the group sessions, do y'all have a way of referring people to higher care facilities? Because I know for a lot of people, body image is not the root cause of their eating disorder. And so talking about it isn't really going to make a huge difference in that disorder.
So the Body Project is not a treatment program for somebody who actually has an eating disorder. So that's the first thing I would say, is that I would not expect the Body Project to actually treat somebody in this form. Actually, Stice does have a new cognitive dissonance-based eating disorder treatment that he adapted from the Body Project that does provide pretty good effects for preliminary effects, but pretty good preliminary effects for outpatient care. Schools run the program very differently. We let schools have a lot of autonomy in terms of how they run the groups. So there are some universities that actually pre-screen people. And anybody with an eating disorder is screened out and sent for higher levels of care. My sororities never wanted to do that. And so people with eating disorders, we know from our data that people with eating disorders do go through. There's a relatively small number. What we did see at Trinity was that actually referrals to the counseling center went up when we started running the Body Project on a regular basis. And the counseling center did some really careful look into that, and it was really clear. They told me without a doubt they have no problem with us running the Body Project, because they said the issue wasn't that we were increasing the number of eating disorders, but that people who went through the Body Project got much more active about referring their friends for care. So because we have these role plays talking about people who are pursuing the thin ideal, they sort of felt more empowered to encourage their friends to go and get treatment. So when we do run, though, like on Tuesday night, at the end of the groups, we hand out slips of paper for referrals if anybody wants to spontaneously refer themselves. But we have seen much more aggressive referral. I do have some research with female athletes, and our head athletic trainer basically says these programs turn over rocks. And that allows them to find cases and ferret things out more easily. And the other thing I actually would say, too, is that in our Greek system, we actually saw, in a very caring way, we saw a number of the sororities who knew that their friends had really serious problems, but previously would have just turned the other way and let them rise into leadership positions, which then sort of modeled the behavior for younger members, go and say to their sisters, we really, really care about you, and you're not going to be allowed to move up into a leadership position until you take care of your health. And we will do everything to support you in that, and we will do everything to help you get help, and we will do anything that your providers say we should be doing to help you, but you will not be allowed to sort of be president of our organization while having an active eating disorder.
I think we're going to take one more. Is there one in the back?
Hi. First of all, thank you so much for your talk. It was very interesting, very beneficial. I'm wondering, how have you adapted the Body Project for cultural differences? So women of different race, different social classes.
So the earliest work that was done there was by Marisol Perez, who's done a lot of cross-cultural work with Latinas. What she basically found was that you needed very little adaptation for Latinas, in part because you allow your participants to find the appearance ideal. So one of the key things we sometimes do is we ditch the term the thin ideal and we just call it the appearance ideal. And because the members of the group get to define what that ideal is, then they just define it, and then you slap a label on it, and after that it's a concept. So that part isn't a really big deal. And then it's just challenging whatever you have agreed on as a group as your ideal. And certainly we see when we've been running down in Mexico, there were really nothing huge changes. One difference though is that when you work with Latino women or black women, you end up having to open up discussion for things like skin lightening creams in terms of the cost. So there are still people out there using lead-based skin lightening creams. And so you really want to sort of let that come out as a cost. So that's the predominant one that we've sort of seen down in those cultures. We very much let the people that we work with there sort of tell us if language isn't right or if we need to tailor language. With WAGs and Dove, I think the term, because we went around and around with a bunch of different terms, I think the term they ended up with beauty ideal was what they wanted to call it. When we run with males, we use appearance ideal is how we phrase that. Trying to think what else. Certainly when we've been running in some of the lower income schools in San Antonio, the leaders just sort of adapt on the fly in the sense. So, the black girls in San Antonio will say, no, it's important that you got like a bigger booty and all of this stuff. And they're like, that's fine, that's part of the ideal. So what happens to those people who don't have the bigger booty? And what are the costs of pursuing the bigger booty, particularly not in the lower income in San Antonio, but when people are doing Brazilian butt lifts and things like that, then those are real costs. Those are financial costs, and they're potentially health costs if you get infection or something goes wrong with the procedure or those types of things. So it adapts pretty easily. On the train-to-trainer side, the most interesting one I heard recently was up in Canada. The sort of Canadian culture is they're so nice and polite to each other that they had a hard time getting the trainers to give sufficiently direct feedback to change the leader's behavior. And so we had to do a lot more work on getting them to break out of that component. We change language regularly, so it's not just translating into French or Spanish, but when we went over to the UK, my mother's British, and so I was able to do most of the translation into British, from American English to British English. We know we'll have to translate over for Australian. This is one of the reasons that one of the best things that ever happened was Eric being able to gain permission to put all the scripts up for free, because we would never convince a publisher. I mean, this is something really interesting, and if any of you are in academia or going to go on or you write anything, hold on to your authorship rights. Because we were really in a bind for a while because we didn't have the right to give the material away. And we wanted to give it away. And now that we have the right to give it away, we can create so many more derivative forms, which allows for that kind of tailoring when we do need to do the tailoring. And we do. I mean, the Canadian version is a little different language-wise. So even the English language Canadian version, the language is subtly altered from the American version. So a lot of it's more language than anything else.
Will you join me in thanking Dr. Becker again?
Thank you very much for having me. Oh, wow.
This is our theme tower on campus.
Oh, how fun.
You have that for you to take back and
Thank you.
enjoy. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much.